I remember the night the fog rolled in, thick and quiet, curling around the canyon like it wanted to swallow the world whole. The trees were barely silhouettes, trembling under a pale, flickering moon. I walked slowly, boots sinking into soft, damp earth, and every breath felt heavier than the last. Somewhere above, a faint humming vibrated through the rocks, almost like a voice I couldn't understand. My flashlight wavered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch toward me, restless and alive. I thought I was alone, but then I heard it, a low, wet scrape behind the brush. My heart slowed and sped in the same beat, frozen and racing all at once. And then I saw it. A figure shifting too fast, too smooth, its eyes reflecting something I had no name for. I wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I couldn't. I never should have stepped closer into that canyon that night. The canyon was quiet. Fog hung heavy, curling around the jagged edges of the rocks. It muffled everything. My footsteps, my breathing, even the soft scrape of my pack against my shoulders. I stepped carefully over pale stones, their surfaces slick with dampness. The air smelled faintly of earth, of cold stone soaked through with rain from days before. A chill brushed my neck, like a finger trailing too long, shadows twisted in corners I couldn't reach. They moved in ways my eyes didn't expect. I thought I saw one stretch, then shrink again. But maybe it was the fog. Maybe it was me. There were whispers, faint, almost sighs, drifting from between the rocks. I froze. My pulse ticked in my ears. The canyon was supposed to be empty, lonely, safe. Yet, these murmurs, they weren't natural. They didn't belong to birds or wind. I took a breath. The fog swallowed it before it reached the stones. A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to convince myself it was imagination, a trick of the mind, alone with the canyon for too long. The rocks ahead gleamed pale in the weak sunlight struggling through the mist. I moved closer. The whispers followed, soft, slipping through cracks and gaps, like someone, or something, just beyond the edge of vision. Then, behind a boulder, a rustle. Not wind, not stone shifting. A subtle vibration in the air in my chest. I stopped. Even my skin prickled at the sensation. The fog seemed to lean in. Breath against my ears, but no one was there. Soft footsteps, or maybe echoes of them, faded into the canyon's curves. I could almost feel eyes tracing my back, but turning was impossible. I was held in the hush of the stones, in the static of quiet that pressed too close. The canyon walls loomed, pale and wet, reflecting nothing. Every shadow was a question. Every fold of fog a hiding place. I strained to listen. The whispers returned, closer now. Faint syllables or nonsense or my own thoughts replaying themselves. I walked on. The air thickened. My boots sank into soft soil damp with hidden moisture. Each step brought a sense of wrongness. The canyon's shape seemed altered. I had passed this bend before, hadn't I? Or maybe it had moved while I wasn't looking. The rustling returned, a soft brushing against rock. It made the hair along my arms stand up. I didn't look. I couldn't look. Yet I felt it, close enough to see the shape, if I dared, and then silence. Sudden, complete. The whispers vanished as if someone had held a hand over them. Even the wind seemed still. I pressed myself against the boulder. The stone was cold, damp against my cheek. I listened. Nothing. Just the static of fog, the faint drip of water from above, the slow pulse of my own heartbeat. My chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. I told myself it was imagination, that the canyon was empty, that I was safe. But the shadows lingered, curling under edges, pooling in places the light didn't reach. And the memory of rustling, that vibration in the air, it did not belong to imagination. I moved again. Careful, slow, measured. Every footstep swallowed in mist. Every whisper I thought I heard. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe it was waiting. The canyon stretched ahead, silent now, but too silent. The kind of silence that hums, just under the skin. I didn't stop until I reached a small rise. From there I looked back. The boulder was just a boulder. The shadows just shadows, the fog. Merely fog, or so I told myself. Yet the whispers had not completely left. A faint sigh lingered in the rocks. a hint of movement beneath the mist. And I realized, even in daylight, even alone, some corners of the canyon never let you go. I kept walking. The fog swallowed the path behind me, and somewhere, just beyond the edges of what I could see, something watched, something whispered. The hollow lay still. The air was thick with pine and damp earth. Night had fallen slowly, dragging a chill through my jacket. I could see my breath curling in the weak glow of the campfire. Around me, shadows pooled between the trunks. They swayed slightly, though the wind barely moved. A rustle shifted through the undergrowth. Something mirrored my movements, but it wasn't quite right. A limb bent in a way it shouldn't. A shadow stretched when I crouched. It breathed when I held still. I swallowed. The firelight flickered across the hollow, pale and trembling. I smelled the wet bark, felt the moss against my fingertips as I reached out to steady myself. The movement in the shadows followed. Always just beyond the fire's reach. Always just out of focus. The quiet was not quiet. It hummed softly through the trees. A static in the branches. A scraping like fingernails across bark. I felt it in my chest. A subtle vibration, low and persistent. I tried to tell myself it was the forest. Animals, maybe. Deer or fox. But the motions were too precise. Too deliberate. They mimicked me, twisted me. A mirror in darkness that did not reflect. The hollow narrowed as the firelight shrank. Shadows pressed closer to the edges of my vision. I could see shapes bending around other shapes. A whisper of movement behind a tree trunk, then gone. Leaves brushing together like soft footsteps. I froze, and the hollow watched me back. The feeling pressed into my skin, warm and wet with sweat. A brush against my neck, though the air was still. I could taste it, a metallic tang like copper on my tongue. Then the lights appeared, pale, flickering between the trees. Not fireflies, not lanterns. They hovered, distant but deliberate. They did not drift, they observed. Their glow skimmed across bark and moss, lighting glimpses of branches that seemed too crooked, too alive. I tried to move closer. My boots sank into soft earth, damp and cold. Leaves crunched quietly underfoot, but the lights remained. Stationary, waiting, or circling just beyond what I could follow. The shadow mimicry returned. Every small twitch of my fingers, every shift of weight answered by something unseen. A pair of limbs curved when I crouched. A head tilted when I turned, always just beyond the firelight, always still. Wrong. The hollow seemed to hold its breath. The hum grew. Or maybe it was my heartbeat. The rustle of unseen movement grew louder, closer. I felt the air thicken around me, press against my lungs. The smell of wet moss and decaying leaves filled my nose, sharp and clinging, and then the eyes. Glowing, yellowed, pale, pinned to the darkness between the trees. They were large, unblinking, watching. I could feel them in my skin, in my bones. Not just looking, but knowing. A soft heat radiated from them, unnatural. The hollowness of the trees hid the rest of it. Only the eyes revealed intention. Only the eyes. Waited, I did not move. I could not. Every instinct screamed to run, to turn, to hide. But the hollow held me in place. The fire flickered. Smoke curled around my face. I tasted the cold metallic tang again. The eyes remained. Time slowed. Each second stretched longer than the last. I felt my own pulse hammer in the dark. And then the lights behind the eyes shifted slightly. A tiny flicker of movement. Like breath on a mirror. I could not look away. And yet I could not see anything else. The hollow had swallowed the rest. Just the eyes remained floating in the dark. Judging. I finally closed my eyes. The glow burned into the lids. Even with my eyes shut, I felt them. A presence, patient, waiting. When I opened them, the fire had died down to embers. The hollow was silent, still. But the eyes had not left. They had only retreated slightly deeper into the dark. And I knew they were still watching. I did not sleep that night. I could not. Every shadow in the hollow whispered with their gaze. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of the fire, the pale lights flickered again. Fog rolled in, thick, heavy, swallowing the canyon floor. It muted everything, my boots, my breath, even the low hum of the wind. The world narrowed to white and gray. I could see barely a step ahead. Shadows clung to the edges of the fog, stretching, folding into shapes that seemed alive. Every stone glistened wet, slick beneath my fingers as I steadied myself. Then a sound, soft, sharp, claws scraping over stone. I froze. The air tightened around me, damp and cold. I smelled wet earth, moss, and something faintly acrid, like metal. It came again, closer. The scrape followed my steps. Every movement echoed, then moved differently. The rustle circled, slipping between the fog like liquid. I couldn't see where it began. Couldn't see where it ended. Shapes appeared. Humanoid at first, thin figures bending like smoke. Then they shifted. Elongated limbs, twisted torsos, heads tilting at impossible angles. The fog clung to them, reshaping them as they moved. I blinked. The shapes remained. The silence between each rustle stretched. It hummed, low beneath the fog. I could feel it against my skin, a vibration that pressed into my chest. My fingers tingled. My neck itched. I wanted to move. I could not. The fog thickened. I could taste it, cold, damp, earthy on my tongue. Each breath came heavy, moist against my throat. The shapes moved closer, their shifting forms brushing the edges of what I thought was solid ground, rustling again. Closer now, not random, circling, patient. I tried to steady my breathing. Listen, track. The scrape moved in a rhythm I could not predict. Each step I took echoed, yet the rustle answered somewhere else. It was around me, everywhere, and nowhere. A figure emerged from the fog, tall, hunched, limbs bending wrong. It mimicked my stance, but the angles, the curves, they were not human. Its face, if it had one, was a blur in the mist. A hum rose in my ears, static, a vibration in the soles of my boots. I backed away. The fog swallowed my retreat. The figure remained. Others followed. Movement in the periphery, shadows between shadows. I touched the rock beside me. Cold, damp, solid. The fog wrapped around my fingers. The scrape shifted behind me, then in front. A soft breath against my ear, though no one was there. Shapes blurred together. Legs, arms, torsos, faces. They mimicked motion, twisting like water. I tried to focus on one. It split into 3, then 5, then vanished entirely, rustling again. Closer, almost beneath me. I pressed my palm to the stone, feeling every vibration. My heart thumped in rhythm with something else. A hidden pulse. I dared to glance upward. The fog above was alive, curling like smoke in slow motion. Light bent oddly, or maybe my eyes did. Every tree, every boulder seemed to lean toward me. Shadows pooled where light should have been. Another rustle. From the left this time. Then right. Behind. I spun slowly. Nothing solid. Just mist and movement. And then silence. A pause that pressed into me. I felt it in my bones. Every hair on my arm stood upright. The fog quivered. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and then it began again. Somewhere else, soft, subtle, claws scraping stone. Circling closer, I did not move. I could not. The shapes lingered in the fog, twisting, shifting, watching. The canyon had swallowed sound, had swallowed light, had swallowed me. Only the rustling remained. Patient, unyielding, and always, always, just beyond where I could see. The canyon breathed. Mist curled along the trail, wet against my jacket, cold on my cheeks. Every step sank slightly into soft earth, the smell of moss and damp stone rising with each movement. I felt watched, not like before, subtle, more like the canyon itself had shifted. The air hummed beneath my skin, a vibration I couldn't place. Then the radio buzzed, small, tinny, unexpected. I hadn't turned it on. A faint hum rose from the speaker. Words whispered, low, fragmented. Do not turn back. Follow. The path. Static licked each syllable, cutting it into shards that rattled against my skull. I pressed it to my ear. Felt the warmth of the device against my fingers, metallic, almost alive. Footsteps echoed mine. Soft, deliberate, matching stride, but slower, then faster. I stopped. They stopped. I moved. They moved. The canyon seemed to pulse with each step. A subtle sway of rock and root. The trees leaned in slightly. Shadows stretched and curved like hands reaching for the radio in my palm. A smell of ozone and damp pine filled the air. The whispers on the radio shifted. Words I didn't expect. Warnings, names, directions, not meant for me, yet meant for me. I felt the hairs on my arms rise, prickling under the touch of unseen fingers. The fog thickened. I could see barely a foot ahead. The trail twisted, though I knew its path. Roots emerged like ribs from the earth, slick with moisture. Every stone glimmered pale in the faint light. Footsteps followed relentlessly, soft, mimicking, matching perfectly, then stretching out in impossible rhythm. I tried to ignore it, pretend I walked alone, but the hum of the radio, the whispers, the canyon's pulse, they all told me I was not. Static grew louder. The radio hissed and cracked. The voice became fragmented, phrases chopped and floating. Turn! Away! Danger! Hidden! Breathe. Do not stop. The words pressed into my skin. Fingers of sound brushing my ears, my neck, crawling under my scalp. I stopped again. Pressed the radio against my chest. The hum lingered. The whispers softened. But my heartbeat drummed against the canyon's rhythm. I could feel it in every root, every stone. The fog swirled in a gentle current. A shadow drifted along the trail ahead, shifting with the light. Humanoid at first, then elongated, twisting into something else entirely. I blinked. The shape dissolved into mist. The radio whispered one last phrase. Clear, sharp, personal. Do not leave here yet. And then silence. I listened. The canyon hummed beneath the fog, but the voice was gone. Only the echo of the message lingered, curling in the mist like smoke. Footsteps no longer matched mine. They moved elsewhere, just beyond my hearing, circling through the canyon like a predator. I kept walking, slowly, carefully, every sense stretched to its limits. Cold air against my face, damp earth under my boots. The metallic warmth of the radio pressed to my palm. The lingering taste of static on my tongue. Shadows bent and twisted with the fog. Each tree and rock seemed alive, pulsing faintly in rhythm with my heartbeat. And then, without warning, the radio went dead, silent, still, cold. The echo remained. A faint vibration, barely audible. I could feel the canyon's intent in it. In every stone, every root, every curl of mist. The message had passed, but the warning had not. I moved onward, alone, yet never truly alone. The fog closed around me, rustling in the underbrush, soft footsteps in rhythm with my own. And the canyon listened. The canopy pressed down. Leaves brushed my face, damp and cold. Branches swayed gently, shifting shadows across the trail. The smell of wet pine lingered, sharp and earthy. Then a pale light. Hovering in the distance, soft, faint, almost trembling. I took a step toward it. The ground underfoot twisted. Roots coiled in ways they had not moments before. The path behind me stretched, impossible, unending. The light pulsed slightly. Warmth brushed my cheeks, though the air remained cold. Shadows detached from the trees. They flinched away from the glow. Edges softened. Shapes bent and recoiled. I moved slowly. Each footfall pressed into moist earth, leaving a faint smell of soil and stone. The light flickered again. Pale, steady, beckoning. I glanced back. The trail had shifted. A rock I passed before now jutted at an odd angle. A root I stepped over had stretched into a coil. The forest was bending, reshaping itself around the glow. Shadows clung to the edges of vision. One twisted figure lingered, then recoiled. It hesitated. A pause that pressed against my chest, cold and quiet. I could almost feel it breathing against my skin. The light drew me onward. I followed without thinking. The air hummed faintly, like a soft pulse beneath the fog and leaves. Each step felt heavier. The mist curled around my ankles, moist and sticky. The scent of damp earth and pine sharpened, metallic under my nose. The forest was alive, not with birds or insects, but with presence. Watching, reshaping, guiding. Shadows twisted again. Fingers of darkness stretched toward me, then shrank from the light. Branches bent in ways that should have been impossible. I felt the rough bark scrape my palms as I steadied myself. The light hovered, always just ahead, always unreachable, yet pulling me forward. I thought I saw a shape in the glow, a figure moving slowly, barely discernible, not stepping from the mist, not quite solid. It lingered at the edge of perception, almost human, almost still. The path twisted again. Roots and stones shifted under my feet. The light pulsed, warmer now, soft against my cheeks, a pale glow in the fog. I could feel it in my chest, a gentle thrum, like a heartbeat echoing my own. I stopped. The shadows around me shrank further. They leaned away from the light, hesitant, unnatural. Branches parted slightly, allowing a clearer view. I caught movement, a silhouette, peering from behind the glow. Still, watching, its outline blurred by mist and light, yet unmistakable. I felt its gaze, cold and quiet, settle on me. The air thickened. Breath caught in my chest. The forest held its breath too. Not a sound, not a rustle. Only the soft pulse of the light. The silhouette lingered, patient, curious. I reached out, but the light trembled slightly. Not bright, not blinding. Just enough to make shadows shiver, to make shapes recoil. The canopy above whispered with the wind, leaves brushing lightly, faint and soft. I tasted damp earth on my tongue, felt the chill of mist against my skin. I stepped closer. The silhouette didn't move, just observed, framed in pale illumination. Roots curled beneath my boots, twisted, impossible, shifting with each careful step. And then a pause. Everything held. Time slowed. The light pulsed once, faint, steady. The figure remained silent. I could not move, could not speak. The forest exhaled around me. Mist clinging, shadows bending, the pale light shimmering. The path behind me had vanished. Only forward remained, only the glow. The silhouette blinked, or maybe it did not. I could not tell. I only knew it watched, and I realized I would follow, always. The trail narrowed. Mist curled along the stone walls, wet and cold against my skin. The smell of damp earth clung to my clothes, mingling with pine and something sharper, metallic. Footsteps sank softly into the mossy ground, leaving a faint imprint before the fog swallowed it. Then I heard it. A low hum, almost imperceptible at first. A pulse beneath the stone, vibrating through my boots up into my chest. It was steady, patient, like a heartbeat buried in the rock itself. I knelt beside the formation. Cold pressed against my palms, rough against fingertips. The hum grew faintly stronger. I leaned closer. The vibration flowed through my arms, settled in my chest, mixing with my own heartbeat. Curiosity tinged with alarm. Visions flickered. Not in the rocks themselves, but in my mind. Shapes, animal, human, twisted together in ways that made the skin along my arms crawl. A torso of stone and fur, limbs bending like roots and bones, eyes that stared at me for a heartbeat before vanishing. I felt the hum in my chest again, a vibration that seemed to speak directly to my bones, warm and cold at once, a low resonance that made my teeth tingle and the hairs on my neck stand upright. I touched the rock again, rough under my palms. Wet from mist, the hum pulsed faster. The shapes flickered again, more vivid, more deliberate. I could smell faint ozone, like the air before a storm. The metallic tang lingered in my mouth. I sat back slightly. The air around the rock shivered, subtle, almost imperceptible. I could hear the static in the silence, soft whispers pressing at the edge of perception. Not words, not yet, but attention, awareness, presence. The forest seemed to lean in. The fog swirled tighter around the formation. Leaves trembled softly. Shadows pooled in odd corners. The hum resonated, blending with the whisper of wind and my own breathing. Visions returned. An animal crouched in the mist. Human hands, elongated, resting on stone. Heads tilted unnaturally, eyes too wide, staring past me. The pulse matched the rock's vibration. My chest quivered in time with it. Curiosity and fear tangled in each beat. I pressed my forehead to the stone. The hum thrummed through my skull, steady, insistent. The visions became flashes. Rapid, fleeting. A collage of fur, skin, bone, and shadow. A soft exhale of air washed over my face, mist curling in my hair. The forest smelled of wet moss and iron. I pulled back slightly. The shapes lingered at the edge of my vision. They did not move in the way animals or humans would. They were aware, watching, waiting. The hum slowed. The vibration faded, settling in the soles of my boots like distant echoes. A breath in the air, static and heavy. I placed my palms on the rock again. Cold, solid, normal, or as normal as it had ever felt. The visions ceased. The rock was still, silent. The forest seemed to exhale, and the tension in my chest eased slightly. Only the faint smell of moss and wet stone remained. I stepped back. The fog pressed closer, curling around my ankles. Leaves brushed softly against my jacket. The canyon walls reflected pale light, still and unbroken. The hum had gone, leaving a quiet so deep it made my ears ache. I stared at the rock. It sat there unchanged, unremarkable, but I knew it had been alive in some way. A slow, patient presence beneath its rough surface. I could still feel the memory of its pulse in my chest. I rose, brushing wet moss from my hands. The forest seemed ordinary again, yet nothing could erase what I had felt. The hum, the shapes, the vibration threading through my bones. The trail ahead beckoned. Fog swirled. The canyon remained silent, heavy with expectation. And somewhere, deep in the stillness, the rock waited. The soil was soft and damp, footprints pressed into it, faint and shallow. I leaned closer, fingertips brushing the cold, wet earth. The scent of moss and decaying leaves rose with each careful inhale. I followed them, slow, deliberate. The canyon walls loomed, gray and slick, narrowing with each step. The air hummed softly like a distant heartbeat. Then I noticed it. A footprint vanished mid-step. Just disappeared. No smear, no indentation, nothing. Only the soil, smooth again, as if untouched. I paused, listened. The canyon held its breath with me. A rustle of leaves, soft, brushing against stone. A cold finger of wind touched my neck. I moved again. Another print. Another disappearance. The ground shifted subtly beneath my boots. Roots twisted, stones reoriented themselves. The path I thought I followed was no longer where I expected. Shadows stretched along the walls. They leaned toward me, then recoiled. The fog wove between the rocks, damp and clinging, curling around my ankles. Every scent, every breath felt amplified. Earth, stone, moss, and something faintly metallic under it all. The footprints appeared again, just ahead. I stepped into one. It felt empty, hollow beneath my boot. I leaned down, pressed my fingers into it. Nothing. The soil smooth and cold. The print gone. I tried to remember the way back. The canyon seemed to shift. A boulder I passed moments ago now blocked the trail. Roots curled differently. The exit I expected was gone. The walls pressed closer. A low vibration hummed in the air. I moved cautiously. Every step measured. The footprints reappeared, faint, guiding me. Then vanished. Then returned. A rhythm I could not predict. Shadows in the fog seemed to mimic my movements. They were not quite right. An arm bent in an impossible curve. A head tilted where no head should be. The canyon had its own pulse, syncing with mine. I stopped. The air felt thick, almost liquid. I could taste it, damp and earthy, metallic beneath the tongue. The fog curled higher, brushing against my face and hands. I smelled moss and wet stone, sharper now, like the forest itself was aware of me. The prints led me forward. I realized I was no longer moving along a trail. The ground beneath me shifted subtly. Every familiar rock and tree rearranged. I stumbled slightly, the earth unsteady beneath my boots, and then it clicked. The tracks were leading me somewhere unseen. Not a place I could see, not a path I could recognize. The canyon had a mind of its own. Every step, every vanished print, every subtle shift, it was deliberate. I felt my chest tighten. The canyon pressed closer. Shadows pooled around me, flickering, twisting. The fog clung to me like damp cloth. Leaves whispered against bark. Roots scraped my palms as I steadied myself. I followed, step by step, prints appearing and disappearing in a rhythm I could not anticipate. The soil cool, soft beneath my touch. The canyon walls seemed to lean toward me, guiding me forward. I tried to look back. The trail had disappeared entirely. Mist filled the gaps between boulders. Everything behind me was erased. Only forward remained. A soft hum rose from the canyon floor. Not from anywhere specific. A vibration beneath my feet, through my bones, matching my pulse. guiding me. The footprints reappeared one final time, leading straight into the mist. I realized then that they were not random, not an accident. They existed for me alone, to follow, to guide me. Somewhere unseen, the canyon waited. Silent, patient. The fog swirled softly around the walls. Shadows stretched, flinched, and receded from the edges of the mist. And I kept moving, step by careful step, drawn forward by the vanished tracks, by the canyon itself. The canyon narrowed around me. Fog curled along the walls, damp and clinging. My boots pressed into soft moss and wet stone. Every breath came cold, sharp, tasting of earth and pine. Then I saw it, a shadow, moving, mirroring my every action, step for step, turn for turn. Yet there was no source, no figure, nothing to cast it. I froze. The shadow paused, but not like a reflection, not like a shape cast by light. It bent, twisted, arms stretched too long, legs contorted in impossible angles. The fog shimmered around it, teasing the edges of perception. I took a step. The shadow followed. I turned slowly. It twisted, flowing like liquid across the canyon wall. Every motion was too precise, too deliberate. I tried to look for a light, a lantern, anything. Nothing. The shadow existed alone. I could feel it in the back of my skull, a cold vibration that brushed my spine. I stopped. My boots sank into damp earth. The shadow froze, curved and bent unnaturally, a silent mockery of movement. The fog drifted through it, edges soft, melting yet exact. I breathed slowly. The mist pressed against my face. The canyon smelled of wet stone and decaying leaves, sharper than before. I felt the rough bark scrape my fingertips as I rested a hand against the wall. I stepped again. The shadow moved. It flowed unnaturally, elongating, curling, folding over itself. I blinked. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. Yet it was aware. A low hum rose in my chest. Not from the canyon, not from wind. It vibrated through my bones. Through the mist. Through the shadow itself, I turned quickly. It bent backward to match me. I reached toward it. It stretched beyond reach. Every movement impossible, unhuman. I could see faint edges flicker in the fog like it was phasing, resisting definition. I stopped again. Heart hammering in my chest. The shadow held impossible angles, stretched long along the canyon wall, then lifted slightly off the ground, hovering, detached, independent. I swallowed. Cold, damp air filled my mouth. The mist brushed against my neck, fingers of fog curling like hesitant hands. The shadow hovered alone, no motion except a slow, deliberate swaying. The canyon held its breath. Even the fog seemed still. I could smell moss and wet rock, sharp and metallic. The vibration in my chest softened but lingered. The shadow leaned slightly toward me. I could feel attention, patient and quiet. A presence without weight, without form. I stepped backward. The shadow mimicked me briefly, then paused again. It seemed to study me. Curious, deliberate, unblinking, unhuman. I moved to the side. It followed. But the canyon shifted subtly around me. Rocks seemed higher. Roots stretched longer. The path twisted in ways my mind could not track. I stopped, finally. The shadow hovered in place. Alone in the fog, detached, patient, waiting. It bent, twisted, shimmered. Not solid, not entirely intangible. It existed between. I could feel its gaze. Cold, quiet, unnerving. The hum in my chest had faded to a low pulse. The fog pressed closer. Every breath tasted damp and metallic. I did not move. Did not breathe more than necessary. The canyon itself seemed to lean back, giving space. Yet the shadow remained, hovering, observing. The mist curled around it, edges softening, light bending strangely in its presence. I finally stepped forward slowly. It shifted with me, detached, yet always aware. The canyon echoed my footfalls. The mist swirled, and the shadow followed. Even when I stopped, it lingered, hovering, detached, patient, and aware. The canyon narrowed again. Mist clung to the walls, thick and cold. My boots pressed into the soft, damp earth. Every breath rose in clouds, tasting of wet stone and pine. Then it began, scraping. Wet, deliberate. Metal on rock. a slow, dragging rhythm that echoed against the canyon walls. I froze, fingers tingling, heart thudding in my chest. I traced the sound. Step by careful step, each scrape tugged me forward, deeper into the fog. The mist curled around my ankles, clinging to my jacket. I smelled earth, wet moss, and something faintly acrid, like iron. Shapes darted at the edge of my vision. Impossible to focus on. They blurred between trees, between boulders. Each movement was quick, deliberate, slipping between shadows. The canyon walls pressed closer. Roots twisted underfoot. The fog thickened, dense and cold. My hands brushed wet stone and moss. The scraping pulsed beneath my skin, through my bones, threading into my chest. I stopped. The echo lingered. Metallic, wet, deliberate. Every instinct screamed. Every sense was alert. I moved again. The shapes shifted faster now, teasing at the corners of my vision. Branches scratched my face. Leaves pressed damp and cold against my hands. The air tasted of earth and cold metal. The fog thickened further. Every step forward felt heavier. The canyon seemed to shift beneath me, subtle and deliberate. Walls leaned slightly. Rocks curved where they had not moments before. The clearing opened, pale and gray, swallowed in mist. The scraping drew me closer. I could feel it vibrating through the fog, through the ground beneath my boots, through the tightness in my chest. Every step was measured, careful. Every heartbeat matched the rhythm of the scrape. Shapes darted again. Not human, not animal, formless yet aware. They lingered in my periphery, flinching away from the fog's pale light. A flash of something long and thin, a glimpse of a shadow with the wrong angles. I crouched, pressed my hand to the wet stone. Cold and slick, the scraping shifted direction, circling, deliberate, always just ahead. The echo pressed against the canyon walls. The air hummed faintly with tension. I moved forward. Branches brushed my cheeks. Roots clung to my boots. The fog thickened further, wrapping around me, pressing cold and damp against my skin. The scraping persisted, relentless, patient, drawing me to the center of the clearing. I could feel shapes in the mist, watching, waiting. They were aware of me, not close enough to touch, yet pressing at the edge of perception. The canyon smelled of wet stone and iron, sharp beneath the damp mist. I paused. The scraping slowed momentarily, then quickened again. I pressed my palms against the wet ground, feeling the vibration thread up my arms. A rhythm, steady, familiar yet wrong. The shapes darted faster now, teasing. I could see flashes of them, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, shifting through fog and shadow. They vanished as quickly as they appeared. The canyon held its breath. I could hear mine in the quiet. The fog pressed closer. The scraping continued, somewhere just beyond reach. Relentless, drawing me forward. Every instinct screamed to stop, to turn back. But curiosity and dread intertwined. I followed. The clearing seemed endless, stretching impossibly in the fog. Shapes flickered in the mist. Branches bent where they should not. The canyon had changed, subtle but undeniable. Walls shifted, roots curled, stones tilted. The scraping persisted, just ahead, just beyond touch. I stopped finally. The echo lingered in the canyon. Wet, deliberate, insistent. The shapes receded. The fog curled around me. The canyon exhaled softly. And yet, the scraping continued. Just beyond reach, relentless, patient, waiting. I could feel it in my chest. In the soles of my boots, threaded through the fog, the mist, the very air. I remained still. Breath held, listening. The mist lay heavy. Leaves clung to my jacket, damp and cold. The canyon pressed close, narrow and gray. Every breath rose in soft clouds, mingling with the scent of wet pine and earth. Then I heard it. Heavy breathing. Deep, deliberate, close, just behind the brush. A slow rhythm. Impossible to place. Not hurried, not quiet. But patient, I froze. Fingers brushing the rough bark of a nearby tree. The smell of moss sharp in my nostrils. Heart thudding, chest tight. I imagined every animal I knew in the canyon. Foxes, deer, crows. All impossible. The breaths did not belong to any creature I could name. Too large, too slow, too present. I shifted slightly. The air pressed against my cheeks. Fog curled around my ankles, damp and clinging. Leaves whispered underfoot. The breaths continued. Steady, heavy, hovering at the edge of hearing, vibrating in my chest. I leaned closer. The mist brushed my face. A faint metallic tang lingered on my tongue. I turned slowly. The brush swayed, but nothing moved. No form, no figure. Only the subtle hum of fog settling against leaves. The rhythm of the breathing persisted. Closer now, yet still unseen. I could feel it, patient and aware. Cold against my skin, a vibration threading through the soles of my boots. Shadows shifted. Branches leaned slightly as if inhaling with me. Roots pressed damp and rough against my palms. The fog wrapped tighter around the canyon walls, curling into corners. I took a careful step back. The breath followed. Heavy, slow. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my feet remained planted. I imagined the brush moving, rustling, bending, hiding something. Every animal impossible, every shape unreal. The canyon smelled of wet stone and iron, the metallic tang sharper now. Each inhale burned slightly, each exhale shaky. I pressed my hand against a tree, rough, wet, solid. The breathing continued behind the bush. Not animal, not human. Something aware, patient, watching. The fog thickened further. Shapes darted at the edge of vision. Branches stretched impossibly, shadows twisting. Every nerve in my body alert. I turned slowly again. The bush remained still. Nothing visible moved. The canyon exhaled softly, and the breath persisted. I leaned slightly forward. The fog pressed against my face, cold and wet. The sound was clear now, heavy, deliberate, constant. I tasted earth and damp stone, smelled moss, wet roots, iron. I crouched. The breathing lowered slightly, almost as if testing me. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, threading through my arms. Patient, waiting, impossible. I did not move, did not speak. The canyon held its breath with me. Leaves whispered. Mist curled around rocks. Shadows pressed at the edges of perception. The bush remained still. No movement betrayed the presence. Yet the breaths persisted, slow and deliberate, close enough to fill the space behind me. Far enough to remain unseen, I took a step forward. The fog shifted. The brush swayed slightly. And still, the heavy breathing, it was patient, unblinking, constant, aware, watching. I remained still. The canyon seemed to lean back, shadows and mist settling around me, and the breaths, relentless, just behind the bush. The canyon walls narrowed again. Fog clung to every surface, curling around roots and rocks. The earth beneath my boots was soft, damp, smelling of moss and wet stone. Every breath rose in pale clouds, tasting of cold air and pine. Then I saw them. Tiny lights flickering in the undergrowth. Too high for fireflies. Too deliberate. They danced in the fog like fragile flames. I stepped closer. The fog pressed against my skin. Branches brushed my cheeks, leaves wet and cold. The lights shifted with every step I took. Quick, deliberate. Shapes moved within the glow. Impossible, fleeting, a thin limb stretching. A curve that seemed too long, too bent. I blinked. They shifted again. I could smell wet earth, iron, moss, and something faintly acrid. The lights flickered, shadows dancing around them. Leaves whispered underfoot. The fog clung to my jacket, cold and damp. A soft growl broke the silence. Low, almost hesitant, vibrating through the mist, threading into my chest. I froze, fingers brushing cold, rough bark. My heart thudded in a rhythm matching the growl. The lights moved closer. Shapes became more distinct, darting between tree trunks. Impossible angles. Elongated limbs. Heads that tilted unnaturally. They flinched away from each other. I tried to breathe slowly. The mist curled around my face. Branches swayed against my hands. Roots pressed cold against my palms. The growl resonated softly, patient, aware. I leaned closer. The shapes shifted at the edge of my vision. The lights flickered faster, almost teasing. A faint metallic tang lingered in the air. The fog pressed into my boots, damp and tight. I froze again. The canyon held its breath. Every instinct screamed caution. The shapes moved like thought, not like creatures bound by bone or muscle. A pair of eyes met mine. A brief, fleeting connection, glowing faintly, pale and unblinking, then vanished into the fog. The shapes scattered, melting into darkness. The growl faded, leaving only a hum in my chest. The lights flickered intermittently, tiny sparks in the fog. Branches and roots shifted softly under damp mist. I pressed my hands to wet stone, feeling its cold pulse through my palms. The fog curled around the canyon walls. The earth smelled of iron and moss. A faint metallic tang lingered on my tongue. The canyon seemed to stretch, reshaping subtly with each breath I took. I stepped forward carefully. The lights flickered again, dancing at the edge of vision. The shapes moved deliberately, impossible limbs bending, twisting. Not human, not animal, aware, patient. I stopped. The canyon exhaled softly. Mist pressed against my face, fog curling around my boots. The lights faded, leaving only shadows. The growl was gone, and yet a faint memory of eyes lingered. Glowing, unblinking, aware, watching, just beyond reach. I could feel the pulse of the canyon in my chest. Roots pressed damp against my palms. Branches whispered softly. The fog clung tight. The lights might return. The shapes might move again. The canyon seemed patient, silent, waiting. I stayed still, breath shallow, senses stretched. The fog, the smell of wet stone, iron, moss, shadows brushing the edge of perception. And somewhere beyond, eyes flickered, aware. The fog was thick again. Each step pressed wet earth beneath my boots. Branches brushed against my arms. Leaves dripped cold and heavy. Every breath tasted damp and metallic. The trail twisted, subtly at first. A boulder where none should have been. A root curling differently than before. I blinked. The path felt familiar. I turned a corner. The clearing appeared again. Exactly the same. Mist clinging to the stones. Shadows pressed against the walls. Leaves damp and shiny. It should not have been possible. I moved forward again. The trail shifted under my feet. Footsteps pressed into soft soil, then vanished. The canyon leaned subtly, walls curving unnaturally. Roots twisted beneath the fog, faces formed in the mist. Pale, fleeting, impossible to hold. Eyes stared from foggy contours. Mouths parted in silence. They faded when I blinked. Returned when I looked away. I spun in place. The clearing remained. The fog pressed closer. Every step I took returned me here. Déjà vu pressed against my skull. A low hum rose in my chest. I crouched, hands brushing wet moss. Cold stone pressed into my palms. The fog curled around my ankles. Branches scraped my arms. The canyon smelled of iron, wet earth, moss. Every inhale sharpened the sense of disorientation. I stepped forward. The trail twisted again. Boulders rearranged. Roots stretched. Shadows shifted as if the canyon itself breathed. Every landmark felt known. And wrong. I stopped. The fog thickened. Faces lingered just at the edges. Watching, observing, I could hear faint whispers, barely human. A breath on the back of my neck. I turned slowly. The clearing remained. Exactly the same. Mist curling in impossible swirls. Shadows pressed against stone. Roots leaned toward me. I stepped carefully. Branches brushed my face. Leaves dripped cold water down my neck. The canyon walls seemed to twist subtly. Footfalls echoed, then vanished. I felt a hum in my chest, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. The fog clung tight. Faces shifted, melted, reformed. Eyes blinked at me. Mouths opened and closed in silence. I spun again. The clearing stayed the same. The fog seemed to thicken with each turn. Roots stretched unnaturally. Boulders shifted slightly, impossible angles. I crouched again, pressed hands to damp earth. Cold, rough, solid. The fog swirled around me. The faces in the mist lingered. They watched from shadows, patient, still, unblinking. I took a cautious step. The path twisted. The canyon leaned subtly. Each step forward felt like returning to the same place. Impossible. The air pressed against my cheeks. Branches scraped softly. Leaves dripped onto my shoulders. The smell of iron and moss was sharp. Close. I stopped. Breath held. The fog pressed in. Faces hovered in the mist, fading, returning. Eyes watching, patient. The canyon exhaled softly around me. I realized then. I could not trust my steps. I could not trust my eyes. The path itself was shifting, reforming. The clearing. Always the clearing. I felt a low hum in my chest, vibrating through bones and fog alike. Roots pressed damp against my palms. The canyon's shadow shifted slightly. And I wondered if reality itself was bending, if the path had ever existed at all. or if I had been walking in fog, twisting endlessly, alone, breathing, lost. The clearing stayed the same, mist curling in slow, deliberate spirals, shadows pressing against stone and roots, faces lingering just beyond focus, watching, waiting. I stepped forward again, and the path twisted beneath me, unnaturally, relentlessly. The canyon exhaled softly, and I wondered if I would ever leave. Fog pressed heavy against the canyon walls. Every step pressed soft earth beneath my boots. Branches brushed my arms, leaves damp and cold. The smell of wet stone and moss lingered in the air. Breath rose in clouds, curling in the mist. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft. Delicate. Calling my name. Not distant, not near, both at once. Echoing through the canyon, threading through the fog. I froze. Fingers pressed against rough bark. The mist curled around my ankles, damp and insistent. Heart thudding, chest tight, the canyon seemed to answer. A faint echo, almost deliberate. Whispers drifting from one wall to another. Soft, yet insistent. I strained to listen. Curiosity and fear tangled in my chest. I stepped forward slowly. The fog pressed against my face. Branches scraped softly against my jacket. Roots twisted underfoot. Every step forward carried the voice, gentle, persistent, guiding, or trapping. Leaves dripped water onto my hands. Cold stone pressed under my palm. The canyon smelled of iron and wet earth. The voice followed, slipping between shadows and fog. I could feel it vibrating faintly in my chest. I turned. Mist swirled around the rocks. No one visible. Yet the whisper persisted, calling, patient, aware. I moved again. The canyon seemed alive. Every rock, every root, every shadow leaning toward the sound. The voice threading through the fog, wrapping around me. Leading me or misleading me, I paused. Fingers brushing damp moss. The cold pressed against my face. Branches leaned slightly, shadows bending. The whisper softened, then strengthened. Faintly metallic, yet alive, I followed. Each step cautious, deliberate. The fog thickened, curling into impossible shapes. Leaves swayed without wind. Roots stretched subtly beneath my boots. The voice threaded between them, teasing, guiding, calling. I stopped. The canyon exhaled softly. Mist wrapped around my boots and jacket. The whisper continued, echoed softly through the walls. Almost close enough to touch, I crouched, hands pressed to cold stone. The vibration of the voice hummed through my chest, soft, insistent, impossible to ignore, patient. I strained my ears. The fog pressed against my cheeks. The canyon smelled of wet stone, moss, and iron, every sense heightened, every nerve taut. I stepped forward again. The voice moved with me, a guide or a trap. Impossible to know, impossible to resist. I turned slowly. Mist curled between boulders. Shadows stretched toward the sound. Branches brushed my face. Leaves dripped water down my neck. The whisper softened, then faded. I held my breath. The canyon remained silent, and yet the echo lingered. A faint vibration in the chest, a memory of sound, of being called. Of following, I stayed still, breath shallow, fog clinging tight, shadows pressing softly, the canyon exhaling around me, and somewhere the echo remained. Fog curled around the canyon's edge. The rocks were slick with mist. Cold pressed against my palms as I touched their rough surfaces. Leaves dripped down my arms, earthy and damp. Every breath rose in clouds, tasting of wet stone and pine. Then I saw it, a shape crouching on the ridge, still, blending into rocks and shadow. Only glimpses revealed it, a shoulder shifting, a head tilting. Eyes hidden, yet somehow watching. I froze, heart thudding, fingers brushing cold stone. Mist curling around my ankles. The canyon smelled of iron and moss. I shifted slightly. The figure seemed to move too. Not fully, not quickly, but enough. Every glance I took, it shifted. Blended again. Impossible angles. A living shadow pressed against stone. I stepped closer. Branches scraped against my jacket. Leaves wet and heavy. Fog clung to my face and boots. The shape remained crouched, patient, waiting, aware. I blinked. It moved again. A shoulder slid behind a boulder. A knee bent impossibly, then straightened. Shadows shifted around it, thick and curling. The air hummed faintly in my chest. I pressed my hand against rough, mossy stone. Cold, damp, solid. The canyon exhaled around me. Leaves whispered underfoot. Roots pressed damp against my palms. The shape crouched, unmoving yet always aware. I tried to breathe slowly. The mist wrapped tight. Shadows stretched, curling across rocks. The figure's outline blurred into boulders. A head tilted just enough to catch the fog's pale light. Then it vanished behind a rock. I stepped carefully forward. Footfalls softened by damp soil. The canyon seemed to lean, twisting subtly. Mist swirled around ankles and wrists. The air tasted metallic, sharp. The shape remained, watching, patient. I froze again. The figure crouched, hidden in shadows. Impossible to fully see. Every glance a shift, every shift, a subtle tension in the chest. The canyon hummed softly with fog and stone. Leaves brushed my face. Branches scraped lightly. Roots pressed wet and rough against my palms. The shape tilted its head. Blended again. Eyes unseen but aware. I moved slowly. Fog pressed tighter. Shadows stretched across boulders and moss. The crouching shape shifted impossibly. A shoulder bent, a knee twisted. A head disappeared behind rocks. Then a faint silhouette shimmered briefly in the fog. I crouched myself. Hands pressed to cold stone, mist curling against my arms. The canyon exhaled softly. The figure remained crouched, patient, hidden, watching. I tried to blink slowly. The shape shifted with the light. Impossible angles, a shoulder sliding behind a boulder, a head tilting slightly, and then it was gone. No trace in the fog, no shadow, no shift, only the canyon breathing, leaves whispering softly. I pressed my hands to wet stone. Cold, rough, solid. Branches scraped gently. Roots pressed damp beneath my palms. The air tasted metallic and earthy. Mist pressed against my face and boots. I waited, still. Breath shallow. Fog curling, shadows pressing. The canyon seemed to hum faintly. A quiet tension lingering. Every glance returned nothing. The crouching shape had vanished. Yet a memory lingered. Patient, aware, watching. I stepped forward slowly. The fog pressed tighter around my jacket and ankles. The canyon exhaled softly. Mist clung, shadows shifted. The sense of being observed lingered. I stopped. Hands pressed to wet stone. Breath shallow. The canyon quiet. And somewhere, the echo of awareness remained. Fog curled low along the canyon floor. It pressed against my boots. Wet and cold, clinging to the damp soil. Branches brushed my arms, slick with moisture. Every breath rose in clouds, sharp with the scent of wet stone and moss. Then I felt it. Coils of fog brushed against my skin, like fingers, pale and soft, dragging lightly across my arms and neck. Cold, insistent, almost aware. Pulling me forward, I froze, heart thudding. Fingers brushing rough stone, mist curling around my ankles. The canyon smelled metallic and earthy. Shapes flickered in the fog. Too brief to understand, too fleeting to catch. A twist of shadow here, a flicker of movement there. Always gone when I tried to focus? I moved slowly. Footsteps softened by damp soil. Roots pressed cold beneath my palms. Branches scraped lightly. The fog followed, curling around my jacket. It tugged softly, guiding or drawing me in. The canyon seemed alive. Every stone, every tree, every shadow leaning subtly. The fog hummed faintly in my chest. I tried to blink it away. Shapes twisted, melted, and reformed. The presence was just beyond comprehension. I crouched, hands pressed to cold stone, mist curling against my arms. Leaves dripped down my jacket. The canyon exhaled softly around me. I strained my ears. The fog whispered lightly. Faint rustles in the brush. Branches swayed with no wind. The cold pressed into my face and neck. The shapes flickered just beyond my vision. I stepped forward. The mist twisted around my ankles. It felt alive, pulling, guiding, drawing me in. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating softly. I stopped. The canyon pressed close. Shadows curled, thick and dark. Leaves brushed my boots. The fog wrapped tighter around my arms. Shapes flickered, then vanished. I blinked slowly. The canyon exhaled. Mist pressed damp against my face. Branches scraped my shoulders. Roots twisted beneath my palms. The fog tugged gently. Leading me forward, I moved again, every step uncertain. The canyon seemed to shift subtly beneath my boots. Shadows stretched, melted, reformed. Shapes flickered at the edge of vision. Too quick to follow. Too strange to name. I pressed my hands against rough stone. Cold, wet, solid. The fog coiled like fingers again. Brushing, tugging, almost aware. I felt drawn to something unseen. A presence just beyond perception. I crouched. Breath shallow. Fog wrapped around my ankles and wrists. Leaves dripped onto my jacket. The canyon exhaled softly. I turned slowly. Shapes flickered in the mist. Too quick to comprehend. Too fleeting to hold. The fog coiled again, brushing pale fingers across my skin. Pulling me forward, I pressed my palms to cold stone. Mist curling across my arms. The canyon hummed softly. Roots pressed damp beneath my hands. Branches swayed lightly, shadows stretching. Then the fog retracted. Pulled away as if by a slow, deliberate breath. The pale fingers vanished. Shapes melted into nothing. The canyon grew silent. I stood alone. The air pressed against my face, cool and empty. Mist lingered, thin and pale. The presence I had felt, gone, yet a memory remained. Soft, insistent, lingering. I breathed slowly. Heart thudding, chest tight. The canyon exhaled softly. Leaves whispered in the stillness. Roots pressed damp beneath my boots. And somewhere, beyond the fog, beyond the shapes, a void remained. Fog pressed heavy between the rocks. My boots sank softly into wet soil. Leaves brushed my arms, cold and damp. Branches scraped against my jacket. The air smelled of moss and wet stone. Breath rose in clouds, sharp and metallic. Then I saw it, a hunched figure, moving too fast, too smooth. Its head lifted, gaze fixed on me, silent, patient. I froze, heart thudding, fingers brushing rough stone, fog curling around my ankles. The canyon smelled faintly of iron. Every step I took, it matched. Perfect sync. Not quite human. Not quite animal. A shadow pressed against the mist, fluid and aware. I blinked. Branches shifted. Leaves dripped onto my hands. The figure hunched slightly, moving closer. Yet not closing distance, only matching mine. A rhythm I couldn't break. I moved forward slowly. Mist wrapped around my boots. Roots pressed cold beneath my palms. Every step echoed softly against the canyon walls. The figure followed, unseen yet present. I stopped. The canyon exhaled. Leaves whispered in the fog. The air tasted sharp, metallic. The figure hunched, waiting. Eyes fixed, unwavering, I pressed my hands to cold stone. Damp and rough beneath my palms. Mist curled against my arms. The canyon hummed faintly. Branches swayed lightly. The hunched figure matched my pause. I turned slowly. Fog pressed tight against my face. Shadows stretched across rocks. The figure hunched, shifting impossibly fast. Head tilting. Eyes fixed, I moved again. Footsteps softened by wet soil. Roots twisted beneath my palms. Branches brushed my shoulders. The figure mirrored each step. Perfectly. Patiently. I tried to blink away the fear. Mist coiled around my ankles. The canyon hummed faintly. Leaves whispered, water dripping from branches. The hunched figure pressed, silent and unnerving. I crouched. Hands on cold stone. Mist curling across my arms. The canyon seemed alive, every shadow leaning subtly, every sound amplified in the fog. The figure moved. Too fast, fluid, impossible angles bending unnaturally, yet always following, matching me. Silent, patient, watching. I pressed my palms to rough, mossy rock. Cold, damp, solid. The fog wrapped around my boots and jacket. Branches brushed lightly. Roots pressed against damp soil. The canyon exhaled softly, then it vanished. Behind a boulder. No shift, no sound. Only emptiness. I stepped closer. Mist curling around my ankles. The canyon smelled metallic, earthy, alive. The space behind the boulder was empty, yet the memory lingered. Eyes fixed. The rhythm of steps matched just moments ago. I stood still. Breath shallow. Fog pressing against my face. Leaves dripping softly. Roots damp beneath my boots. The canyon exhaled. The hunched figure was gone. Yet awareness remained. A quiet tension pressing against the chest. A shadow lingering in memory. Watching. I moved slowly, every step cautious. Fog curling around my ankles, mist pressing damp against my skin. The canyon whispered softly, endlessly, and somewhere, behind the rocks, the memory of those eyes remained. Night pressed down on the canyon. Mist hung low, curling around rocks and roots. The air smelled of wet earth and cold stone. Leaves whispered softly with every breath of wind. My boots sank into damp soil, each step cautious, hesitant. Then I heard it, a cry, echoing across the canyon. Thin, distant, almost human. The sound stretched impossibly, folding over cliffs, slipping through fog. I froze. The canyon carried it far and wide. I strained my ears. Branches shivered against my jacket. Mist pressed damp against my skin. Heart thudding, shapes moved in the fog. Just at the edge of vision, they moved toward the sound, then vanished, like smoke through fingers. I took a slow step forward. Fog curled around my ankles. Roots pressed cold beneath my palms. Leaves dripped softly. The canyon exhaled, long and low. The cries came again, faint, distant, echoing endlessly. Impossible to locate. I turned in circles. Mist coiled, brushing arms and face. Shadows stretched unnaturally across stones. I crouched, hands pressed to damp rock. The canyon smelled metallic, earthy, alive. The cries echoed. Shapes flickered in the fog, always moving toward the sound. Then gone. I moved slowly. Footsteps softened by wet soil. Branches brushed my shoulders. Mist wrapped around boots and jacket. The canyon seemed to shift subtly beneath me. Shadows bent. Shapes flickered. Each cry lingered. Fading, returning, echoing. The canyon held it in memory. Every stone seemed aware. Every branch listening. The fog hummed faintly. I stopped. The canyon was silent except for echoes. Leaves whispered softly. Mist pressed cold against my skin. Shapes flitted at the edge of vision. Always gone when I looked directly. I pressed my palms to rough stone. Cold, damp, solid. The cries came again. A note of longing. A note of fear. Stretching, impossible. Fading into nothing. I breathed slowly. Heart thudding. Mist curling against arms and ankles. Roots pressed damp beneath my palms. Branches brushed my jacket. I tried to track the sound. Impossible. It twisted through the canyon, bouncing from cliff to cliff, folding over itself. Shadows flickered, shapes moving, then gone. I crouched again. Hands on cold stone. The canyon exhaled softly. Mist curled around my shoulders. Leaves whispered against boots. The echoes of the cries lingered. I moved forward cautiously. Every step soft, fog wrapping, twisting. Shapes flitted at the edge of perception, always moving toward the cries. Then vanishing, I stopped. The canyon held its breath. Mist pressed damp against my face. Leaves dripping, roots cold beneath my hands. The cries faded, yet their memory remained. I listened. Stillness. The canyon smelled of wet stone and earth. Mist pressed against skin. Branches swayed lightly. Shadows stretched, thin and long. The cries were gone. Only echoes remained in memory. The canyon exhaled softly. Shapes flickered at the edges of fog. Shadows twisted, and somewhere, far beyond reach, the sound lingered, a memory of fear, a memory of distance, of something calling, something present, yet impossible to find. The canyon pressed quiet and heavy around me, mist curling against boots and jacket, and I stood alone. Rain slicked the stones, turning the canyon floor into a mirror. Mist clung to my jacket, cold and damp. Leaves dripped, water plinking softly against rock. The smell of wet stone filled the air, earthy and metallic. My boots pressed cautiously against the slick surface. Then I noticed it. Movement. Not behind me. In the reflection. A figure, slow, deliberate, mirroring my every step. I froze. Mist curling around my ankles. Branches swayed overhead. Leaves brushed my face. The canyon hummed faintly with dripping water. I moved forward slowly. Boots sliding over wet stone. Hands brushing rough rock. The figure followed, matching me perfectly. Every gesture, every shift of weight. I glanced behind. Nothing. Just fog and dripping leaves. Yet in the reflection it remained. Watching, copying, waiting. A shiver ran down my spine. Mist pressed damp against my neck. Roots twisted beneath my palms. The canyon smelled of rain and wet earth. The reflection rippled slightly, but the figure stayed. I lifted a hand. The reflection did the same. Slow, exact, deliberate. I drew back. It mirrored me instantly, unblinking. Patient. I crouched. Hands pressed to slick stone. Mist curling over arms. Leaves brushing my jacket. The figure mirrored, crouching too. Every movement deliberate, uncanny. I stood. Boots slipping slightly on wet rock. Mist pressing cold against ankles. Branches swayed lightly overhead. The reflection followed. Each movement mirrored in slow precision. I stepped sideways. The figure moved exactly the same, eyes unblinking in my mind's eye. I shivered, though fog pressed damp against my skin. The canyon seemed alive with silent watching. Every drop of rain echoed softly in the silence. I crouched again, tracing roots and stones with my fingers, mist curling damp around me. The reflection followed, patient, slow, exact, deliberate. I dared a step backward, boots pressed against wet stone, mist brushing wrists. The figure mirrored perfectly. Every motion measured, every movement unnervingly intentional. I turned slowly, facing the reflection directly. Mist pressed cold against my shoulders. Branches whispered overhead. Leaves dripped softly onto slick stone, and it was gone. No shape behind me, no shadow. Only my own reflection in the rain-slick stone. The canyon exhaled softly. Fog curling around ankles and boots. The stone glimmered, empty. I stepped forward cautiously. Mist curling along wet rocks, leaves brushing my face. Roots pressing cold beneath palms. The air smelled of earth and rain, heavy and still. The canyon seemed aware. I glanced at the stone again. No figure, no hint. Yet the memory lingered. Every motion mirrored in my mind, slow, deliberate, impossible. I moved on. Boots slipping slightly on wet rock. Mist wrapping damp around arms and jacket. Branches whispering overhead. Leaves dripping softly. The reflection stayed empty, but the sensation remained. The canyon exhaled. Mist pressed against skin. Water dripping softly from leaves. Every step cautious, measured. The memory of mirrored motion followed me. Slow, exact, deliberate. I kept moving. Stone slick beneath my boots. Roots pressing damp beneath palms. Fog curling, twisting. And somewhere in the canyon's memory, the reflection waited. Branches twisted overhead, tangled like fingers. Pale light filtered through, touching the canyon floor in jagged lines. Mist curled between the roots, damp and cold. The smell of wet earth pressed into my nose. Each breath felt heavier here, humid and thick with rain. Shadows moved. Not mine, not cast by anything I could see. They flickered across stone, twitching, reacting to nothing. I froze. Footsteps softened against wet rock. Leaves whispered in the wind, a rustle, behind a boulder. Near a twisted root, but nothing emerged. Only the shadows shifting, soft, independent, unsettling. I took a cautious step. Boots pressed against slick stone. Fog curling along ankles. The shadows twitched again, bending unnaturally, following no source I could see. The canyon felt alive, watching, listening, breathing with me. I moved slowly, tracing the twisted paths of stone and roots. Branches overhead swayed, dripping water onto my shoulders. Shadows stretched longer as I walked, detached from the shapes above. A chill crawled along my spine. Mist brushed my neck. Rustling whispered through leaves. I stopped. Shadows paused too, suspended. The air thickened. My chest pressed with unease. Every muscle tensed. A faint, deliberate movement. Something brushed along a boulder, rustling close yet unseen. I glanced around. Nothing. Mist swallowed the edges of vision. The canyon exhaled softly. I walked again, careful, boots slipping slightly on wet rock, hands brushing damp roots. Shadows danced between branches, twisting in ways impossible for the light above. They seemed aware of me, shifting faster when I lingered. Retreating when I moved, the canyon smelled of damp leaves and rain-soaked earth. Every drop of water echoed softly off stone. Shadows moved again, independent, not tied to any branch, any boulder, any tree. A strange, quiet intelligence lingered in the air. I crouched, tracing roots with fingers slick from mist. Branches overhead whispered, creaking. Leaves dripped, cold against skin. The shadows hesitated, then moved closer. bending unnaturally, reaching. Not for me, but around me. I rose slowly, boots slipping slightly. Breath shallow, fog curling damp along my jacket. Rustling brushed the corner of my ear. The canyon held its silence. Then one shadow shifted completely, detached from branch or boulder. It floated, slow, deliberate, over stone, past roots. Hovering slightly above the wet canyon floor, I didn't breathe. Mist curled damp around my boots and wrists. The detached shadow drifted further, fading into fog. I followed with my eyes, careful not to move too quickly. The air smelled of wet moss and cold stone. Branches whispered faintly overhead. Leaves dripped in random rhythm. The shadow faded, until only fog remained, a pause. The canyon breathed, mist swirling over stone. Branches creaked softly. I could still feel the presence heavy in the damp air. The memory of the shadow lingered, twisting my chest with unease. I stepped forward slowly, boots pressing wet stone, careful of roots. Fog curling around ankles, brushing skin. Branches swayed above, sending droplets cold against my shoulders. Shadows twitched faintly in peripheral vision, detached, restless. I stopped again. The canyon was silent. Only fog and dripping leaves. But the weight of unseen eyes pressed on me. Every branch, every shadow, every movement remembered. The detached shadow had vanished, but the feeling remained. I moved on, careful, slow, mist curling damp over hands and jacket, stone slick beneath boots, rustling soft in the distance. The canyon exhaled quietly, a pulse beneath the fog. And somewhere between branches and wet roots, a shadow waited, detached, patient, waiting to drift again. The canyon swallowed the echoes. Fog pressed cold against my skin. Branches whispered overhead. Stone glistened under pale light. I walked onward, uneasy, aware, alone. The shadow was gone. Yet I felt it linger. The canyon stretched endlessly, walls slick with rain. Mist rolled low, curling around stone like fingers. The air smelled of wet earth and cold moss. Each step pressed boots into the soft ground, damp and uneven. A faint hum stirred in the rocks. Not mechanical, not familiar. More like a pulse, slow, steady, alive. The wind shifted. It carried whispers. Soft, impossible to understand. Rustling through branches, sliding across slick stone, I inhaled. The canyon seemed to inhale too, a chest rising beneath fog, breath matching my own, cold against my face. Shapes flickered at the edges of vision, branches bending in ways they shouldn't, mist twisting like smoke around unseen limbs. I stopped, listening. The wind whispered again, a soft sigh like exhaled breath. Shadows leaned toward me, almost tangible. I shivered, mist brushing my neck. I walked slowly, careful, boots pressing wet stone, roots slick beneath fingertips. The canyon exhaled, a deep, resonant sigh that vibrated through bones. I felt it in my chest, echoing heartbeat. The canyon shifted subtly. Stone seemed to breathe. Moss lifted and settled. Branches moved without wind. I thought I heard whispers in the pause between breaths. Every inhalation carried shapes. Flickers of movement, too fleeting to understand. Eyes glimpsed and gone. Rustling that circled, never touching. I breathed shallowly, tasting cold mist. I paused at a narrow bend. The canyon seemed to draw closer. Walls stretching inward slightly. Air thick with damp and something heavier. Presence. I felt watched, not just by eyes, but by the canyon itself. The mist twisted around ankles. Shadows elongated across stone. The wind hummed a low note, vibrating through ribs. I pressed hands to stone, slick and cold. The pulse matched mine, or mine matched it. I couldn't tell. A shape moved just beyond fog. I blinked. It dissolved into mist before recognition. A faint brush against my arm. But no wind, no form. I breathed in again. And the canyon inhaled with me. Slow, deep. The rhythm of air and stone sinking. Every heartbeat echoed in fog and rock. Mist swirled higher, brushing wet hair against cheeks. Shadows leaned toward light, then away. I stepped forward cautiously. The canyon exhaled. Cool air rolling over ankles and wrists. I felt it against my chest, against my skin. The whispers grew. Soft, urgent, unfamiliar words, almost names. The pulse beneath my feet quickened. or my heart slowed, yielding to its rhythm. Shapes flickered once more. Along stone walls, in mist, across roots. They moved like memory, fleeting, touching nothing. Yet leaving awareness, prickling skin. I halted. Boots pressed against slick stone, mist curling around them. The canyon waited. I waited. Breath synchronized, slow, deliberate. A final exhale swept through the canyon. It carried moisture, smell of wet moss, whisper of unseen presence. Every shadow paused. Every shape held still. And then, in a quiet that pressed on my ears, I felt the canyon's heartbeat fully. It matched mine. Pulse against pulse, breath against breath, rhythm syncing. I was not alone. The canyon and I were together. I stepped forward. Mist brushing my shoulders, chilling wet against skin. Branches overhead whispered faintly. Stone slick beneath cautious boots. The canyon's pulse steady, breathing with me. Every inhalation brought shapes. Every exhale carried whispers. I was tethered to the canyon's rhythm. Drawn in, part of its pulse. Cold mist and wet stone pressed close. I paused again, listening. Whispers, shadows, shapes, all in time. The canyon exhaled softly. I inhaled, joined in rhythm, alive with it. Tethered, the wind shifted once more. Mist curled higher. Shadows stretched and leaned. And I, alone yet connected, walked forward. Every step, every breath, bound to the canyon's heartbeat. Its breath, my own. The canyon waited, always watching, always breathing, and I followed. Moonlight spilled over the canyon walls. Wet rocks gleamed, silver and cold under the faint glow. The air smelled of damp stone and night chill. I stepped carefully, boots pressing into slick surfaces. A glimmer caught my eye. Just a flicker, fleeting. Nothing solid. Yet it pulled me forward, soft insistence in the silence. Branches whispered above. Mist rolled low along the canyon floor. Every inhalation tasted of cold fog and wet earth. I paused. The glimmer shifted. Not gone, but elsewhere I followed. Feet careful, hands brushing rough stone. The glimmer moved again, teasing, elusive. A trick of light? Or something else? Watching? Shadows leaned and bent. Not with wind, but with some hidden intent. The canyon itself felt alive, shifting subtly beneath moonlight. Another glimmer appeared, just at the edge of vision. Quick, fleeting, like reflection on moving water. I blinked. It was gone. I heard a faint rustle behind me. Nothing visible. My breath rose in soft clouds, mist coiling around ankles. I pressed fingertips to cold rock. Slick, wet, unyielding. The glimmer flickered again, pale, teasing, unreachable. I moved slowly, careful not to snap twig or rock underfoot. Shapes shifted in peripheral vision. Nothing concrete, but awareness prickled, like eyes on skin. A sudden shiver ran through the canyon. Air thickened with damp and expectation. I halted, listening. Whispers carried by wind, or the canyon itself, signaling. The glimmer moved farther. Leading or luring, I couldn't tell. Every step forward stretched the shadows. Mist curled around limbs, cool fingers brushing wrists. I felt observed. I bent closer to a wet stone. Moonlight reflected sharply. A shape flickered. Impossible to hold. Not fully formed. I exhaled, mist clouding vision. It vanished. Soft footsteps or the echo of them followed. Not matching mine, but close. I turned. Nothing. Only mist, curling and twisting around jagged stones. The glimmer appeared again. Higher, across a slick wall, silver like frost on dark stone. I traced it with eyes moving slowly along uneven footing. The canyon hummed faintly with wind, a pulse beneath stone, soft but insistent. Mist swirled higher, touching skin, cold, damp. Branches whispered in faint arcs. Every sound exaggerated in still night, rustling that suggested presence. I stopped at the edge of a ledge. The glimmer hovered just beyond reach. Movement in shadows hinted at watchers. Faint, deliberate, unseen, the canyon held its breath with me. I stepped closer, boots pressing slick stone, mist curling up calves, every muscle tense, air tasting of wet stone and something older. A flicker, pale and fleeting, flashed once more. I blinked. Nothing. The canyon exhaled softly. Branches swayed without wind. Shadows stretched, then shrank. I listened. Nothing but my own heartbeat. or the canyon's rhythm indistinguishable. The glimmer shifted again, always just beyond reach, just enough to tease, just enough to pull. The mist thickened, fingers of fog brushing arms. I moved with care. Silent steps, careful breath, shadows at the edges of vision. Watching. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the pale glimmer disappeared, dissolved into mist. No trace remained on stone. No light to follow, I exhaled. Mist curling from lips, fingertips cold. The canyon felt still, but alive, waiting, watching. Every stone slick with memory of light that vanished. I stood there, alone, moonlight spilling weakly across wet surfaces, branches whispering softly above, mist curling around ankles, eyes scanning the shadows. Nothing moved, nothing visible. Only memory of glimmer, of movement just beyond sight, of being observed in silence. I took a slow step forward, mist brushing legs, canyon exhaling in time with me, and somewhere in the folds of shadow and fog, a glimmer vanished completely, leaving only silence and the echo of its teasing presence. The canyon stretched wide, silent and still. Rocks glistened under pale moonlight. Mist clung to crevices, curling around stone like fingers. The air smelled of wet earth and cold stone. I moved slowly, boots pressing against slick surfaces. Branches whispered overhead, rustling that might have been wind or something else. A shiver ran down my spine. Eyes. I felt them. Watching. Not from the ground. Not from the shadows at my feet. Above. High among cliffs and jagged rocks. Perhaps hiding in the skeletal branches of trees. I froze. Air heavy damp. Breath shallow. Every inhalation seemed magnified, pulled taut by the stillness. Shadows flickered. Subtle. Unnatural. Like the canyon itself breathed. Every rock, every branch moved with quiet intent. I raised my eyes. Moonlight glinting off wet stone. Nothing visible. Yet the sense of presence persisted. A loose stone shifted above. Or was it? I couldn't tell. Wind? Or a movement too deliberate to be natural? Gooseflesh prickled along arms. Mist curling, brushing skin. I stepped forward. Each footfall careful, deliberate. Branches scraped lightly against shoulders. A faint hum seemed to rise from the canyon walls. Low, vibrating, echoing. Something stirred, high. A shadow flickered against cliff face. Gone when I blinked. I paused, heart thudding. A soft exhale misting in cold air. I tried to locate it. Movement too subtle. A rustle too precise. Branches swaying without wind. Rocks glinting oddly in moonlight. The canyon itself alive. Every glance upward promised something. Then nothing. Empty cliff faces. Still trees. Yet awareness stayed. Eyes upon me, I moved again. Careful steps on whetstone. Mist curling over boots. Hands brushing rough surfaces. The canyon's rhythm matching mine. Or mine echoing its pulse. Shadows flickered again. Closer now, or at least seeming so. Like the canyon shifted to follow my gaze. Every glance upward held anticipation. Every expectation left hollow. I stopped. Breath loud in my ears. Mist clinging to hair and neck. Something high above, still watching. A presence that couldn't be caught in sight. A sudden movement, quick, too fast for branches to sway. Too smooth for falling stones. Eyes lifted, searching, straining. Nothing. Just pale moonlight slicing the canyon walls. A shiver passed through the air. Rustling soft, deliberate, somewhere above. I stepped back. Mist curling around ankles. The canyon seemed to hold its breath with me. I tilted my head. High branches swayed slightly. Shadows shifting. A sense of weight above me. Near me. Watching. The canyon exhaled with the wind. Mist rising, swirling around jagged rocks. Shadows danced across cliff faces. Every stone a potential eye. Every movement echoed with intent. I held still, listening to the soft hum of wet stone. The whisper of branches against night air. The pulse of my heartbeat in sync, or in rivalry with the canyon. A fleeting glance upward. Expectation tense in every nerve. Moonlight revealed nothing. Only stone, mist, and the faint shimmer of shadow. No figure, no movement. Yet the sense remained, eyes, watching, always watching. I exhaled slowly. Mist curling, brushing my cheeks. Branches settling into stillness. Rocks cold beneath fingertips. The canyon's presence lingering. I moved on, careful, every step measured. Awareness stretched upward, scanning, alert. The canyon seemed to breathe around me. Shadows flickered, faint and deliberate, and then, nothing. No movement, no rustle, no eyes visible, only the canyon still and waiting. But I knew. Somewhere above, it had been there, watching, silent, patient, and gone before I could truly see. I stepped forward again, mist curling around boots, cold stone pressing underfoot, branches whispering overhead, and somewhere high above, a presence lingered, waiting. The canyon lay shrouded in mist. Rocks glistened from recent rain. Cold air clung to my skin. A damp scent rose from stone and soil. I walked slowly, boots pressing into slick ground. Branches scraped lightly overhead. Fog curled around ankles, soft and damp. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps. Behind me, not hurried, not hesitant. Perfectly paced with my own. Each step I took echoed back. A shadow of movement on stone. I paused. Breath shallow. Mist coiling around shoulders. Silence stretched, but the footsteps stayed. Matching, patient, deliberate. I stepped forward. The canyon seemed to warp around me. Paths twisted unnaturally. Familiar turns now hiding exits. Branches seemed to shift, blocking view. Rocks glimmered with unseen eyes. Another step. Behind me, closer now. Yet nothing in sight. No shadow, no form. Just the echo, perfect, constant. I stopped. The canyon held its breath with me. The footsteps stopped too. A stillness pressed against ears. Mist curling, brushing my cheeks. Every nerve alert, trembling. I looked around. Cliffs looming. Twisted branches. Fog thickening between boulders. Paths that should lead somewhere led nowhere. All exits vanished, or were hidden, a soft rustle behind. The steps resumed. Closer now, measured, unfaltering. I tried to quicken pace. Boots scraping wet stone. Mist clinging to clothes. But the echo followed. Perfectly matched. Faster. Still matched. I stopped again. So did they. Silence hung thick and heavy. Then faintly a breath. Not mine, not the wind. A rhythm, subtle, behind me. Matching heartbeat. Steady, unseen. I stepped sideways. The canyon seemed to tilt. Rocks shifting just out of vision. Mist curling, fingers brushing skin. Branches tapping lightly against forearms. The echo of steps resumed. Closer, closer still. I could almost feel pressure in the air. A presence. Waiting. Watching. I tried turning, slowly. Mist swirling between rocks. Fog thickening in front. Nothing there, no one. Yet footsteps pressed on. Matching mine, perfect. I stopped once more. Fog curling around legs. Cold pressing into chest. The canyon's rhythm syncing with my own. Step! Step! Echoed, mirrored, deliberate. I held my breath. Footsteps stopped again. A waiting hush, like stone listening. Mist coiling higher, brushing shoulders. Branches bending, without wind. Then they moved. Closer. The canyon seemed to pulse with each step. Stone slick under fingers. Air dense and trembling. A faint hum rising from the rocks. I tried walking sideways. Step! Step! Matching mine. Every direction mirrored. No escape. No sound except echo and breath. I froze completely. Mist curling around ankles. Branches scraping lightly overhead. The echo fell silent. Then 1, 2, closer now. Steps pressing just behind, I dared not turn. The canyon pressed in. Rocks glinting pale in moonlight. Mist brushing hair and neck. Every sense alive. Another step. Closer still. The canyon seemed to fold in on itself. Paths twisted, bends repeated. Branches like fingers blocking view. Fog thickened like liquid. I breathed. Steps paused. A suspended silence. Then inevitably, resumed. Closer, patient, unyielding. I moved slowly. Every step careful, measured. Footsteps mirrored. Every nerve alert. Every muscle tense. The canyon exhaled with the wind. Mist curling, brushing my face. Shadows flickering along stone. A sense of unseen eyes pressing down. Watching, matching, always just behind. I stopped again. Steps halted as if in conversation with my own. A pause so brief I barely noticed. Then a single step forward. Closer than before, I dared not move. Footsteps hovered. Just behind, a presence unbroken by sight, unyielding, waiting, mist curled around ankles. Branches whispered above. The canyon pressed in from every side, and behind me, the unseen footsteps continued. Closer. The canyon narrowed here, rocks stacked like jagged teeth. Fog hung low, damp on my skin. The air smelled of wet stone and moss. I stepped closer, boots pressing into soft soil. Branches scraped overhead, hesitant like whispers. A low hum began beneath the earth, at first almost nothing. A vibration against ribs, a pulse that resonated with my heartbeat. I froze, breath shallow. The hollow yawned before me, dark, deep, unseen. Shadows pooled along its walls. The hum grew stronger, warmth, or pressure against my chest. I leaned in, fingers brushing stone, slick and cold. Vibrations traveled through my bones, a subtle rhythm, steady, patient. Shadows flickered, swaying with the hum. I inhaled sharply. The sound pressed against eardrums. A faint metallic taste rose in my mouth. I could feel the canyon moving with it. Air pulsing, stones trembling lightly beneath mist, steps closer, soft, measured. Branches shivered around me, though the wind slept. Shadows bent unnaturally, tracing curves I couldn't follow. I crouched slightly, feeling the vibration stronger at fingertips. It seemed alive, a presence curling around me. Not hostile, not friendly, curious, patient. A soft rustle at the edge of vision. Shadows stretched along walls, joined the rhythm. They danced in slow arcs, bending over each other, then retracted, flickered, gone. I swallowed, breath warm against cold mist. Every nerve alert. The hum continued, deeper now, rising and falling like the chest of a sleeping giant. The canyon itself seemed to lean closer. Air thickened with resonance. Stone hummed beneath knees. Branches tapped lightly overhead in time. A faint smell of wet earth and something metallic. I stepped into the hollow, mist curling around ankles, fingers brushing palms. Shadows followed every movement, rhythmic, slow, measured. I leaned further. The vibration coiled into my chest, pulse syncing with my own heartbeat. I closed eyes briefly, felt the hum traveling through veins, a flicker in the corner of vision, shadow shapes bending, swaying, dancing along the walls. Not creatures, not human. Something else. Part of the hum. Part of the canyon. The low sound deepened, resonated with every breath. Branches above shivered without wind. Mist thickened, curling around calves. Stone pressed cold against fingers. I stepped back. The hum seemed to follow, pushing against chest. A soft pressure like inhaling and exhaling together. I breathed shallowly. Shadows paused mid-arc. A faint ringing joined the hum. High-pitched, subtle. Edges of sound like static in the mind. I closed eyes tighter. Mist brushing hair and neck. Vibration thrumming through every joint. I dared a glance up. Shadows danced over ledges and stones, flickering in time. Silent shapes swaying rhythmically. The canyon moved in concert, living, breathing, waiting. I crouched lower, fingers brushing wet stone. Hum coiled like smoke around chest. Mist lifting slightly, swirling at ankles. Shadows stretched, elongated, then paused. Still. The sound stopped. Abrupt. Silence fell. Ringing lingered in ears. Mist hung heavier, damp and suffocating. Stone slick beneath fingertips. Shadows frozen mid-dance. A void where rhythm had been. I breathed slowly. The canyon exhaled with me. Cold air brushing face, fingers numb. Mist curling around legs, unmoving now. Every sense alert, I stepped back. Boots scraping wet stone. Shadows stayed still. The ringing in my ears lingered high and thin. Like a memory. A pulse left behind in the silence. I crouched once more. Fingers pressed to slick stone. Hollow beneath, still resonating faintly in bones. Not sound, not air. Something. Waiting, patient, unseen. I rose slowly. Mist drifting over ankles. Branches brushing arms. Shadows still, paused mid-sway. The canyon breathing silently around me. I took a step away. Another. The ringing in ears fading, but the emptiness remained. The hollow waiting, still alive in the quiet. I left, careful, measured, boots pressing wet soil, mist curling softly behind me, shadows stretching to follow, then vanishing into the canyon. Silence remained. The hollow hummed no more, but the memory of it, pressed against my chest, slowly fading like breath, left in the bones. The canyon was quiet tonight. Mist draped over stones like silk. Air thick, cold against my cheeks. Breath visible, slow. I moved cautiously, boots pressing damp soil. Every step echoed softly, swallowed by fog. Something in the shadows shifted. A flicker, a glimmer. I paused, eyes countless, glowing faintly in the mist, pale, unblinking. They followed my every movement. Not human. Not any animal I'd known. I held still, heart thudding in ears. Branches scraped softly overhead. Mist curled around ankles. A smell. Damp earth, something metallic. I reached forward. Closer, careful. The eyes blinked or vanished. Gone in a soft blur of fog. But another appeared, closer. I inhaled sharply. The canyon breathed around me. A hum beneath stone and air. Shadows stretched unnaturally. I could feel them watching from every ridge, every ledge. The fog flickered, brushing my face. I shivered. I turned slowly. Eyes reappeared, fleeting between rocks. They darted, never stationary. Soft hum rising in my chest. I felt a pulse, syncing with the canyon's rhythm. I whispered a name. Silence answered. Not quiet. A presence pressing. The mist swirled over fingers, wet and cold. I stepped forward. Eyes vanished at the same pace. I followed. They re-emerged in a patch of pale light. Watching again. Distant, intimate, impossible to ignore. Fog thickened, curling around my legs. Shadows stretched along stone. I could hear rustling. Not leaves, not wind. Something moving quietly behind. I stopped. The eyes froze mid-glimmer. I held breath. A thin mist brushed my lips. Cool, damp, lingering. I exhaled slowly. They disappeared. I thought for a moment they were gone. But in the next step, another pair shimmered in the distance. Watching. Waiting. I stumbled over a root, soft mud pressing into boots. Mist rose around me, curling like fingers. I paused. The eyes multiplied. All around, flickering between branches, rocks, fog. Not reflecting. Not shining. Existing. I crouched slightly, hands brushing wet stone, hoping for some understanding, for a glimpse of reason. But the eyes followed, never resting, watching patiently. Silent, unyielding, I dared to move again. Step after step, slow, measured. Every glimmer in peripheral vision followed. I turned quickly. Nothing. Then another blink, pale and fleeting. The canyon exhaled. Mist swirled over shoulders. A faint hum beneath the soil, rising with heartbeat. Eyes vanished once more, only to reappear in the dim shapes of the morning mist. I reached a ridge, pale light breaking the horizon. Eyes flickered there, soft and cold, countless, unmoving in the brightness, yet impossible to approach. I turned slowly, scanning every stone, every tree. Nothing. Then a flicker in the mist. Watching. Waiting. A shadow of movement and gone. I exhaled, chest tight. Morning carried dew and fog. The canyon alive, silent, patient. I could feel the hum in stone and air. A rhythm lingering, pressing against the skin. I started to walk away. Boots pressing wet soil. Mist curling like smoke at ankles. Eyes followed in the distance. Fading, reappearing with each step. Always watching, always vanishing. The canyon breathed with me. Shadows stretched and bent in pale light. I could hear the static whisper in fog brush against skin and hair. A lingering vibration in the chest. I reached the canyon's edge. The world beyond pale, soft with morning light. Eyes blinked once in the fog, then vanished. I exhaled. Shoulders tense, mist brushing fingers one last time. I looked back. Nothing visible. But I could feel them. Eyes pressing softly through the mist. Countless, patient, silent. I stepped into the clearing beyond the canyon. Boots squelching in wet grass. Mist lifting slowly. The hum faded. But the memory remained. I turned my back on the canyon. The air smelled of wet stone, damp earth, and lingering fog. Soft wind brushing hair and neck. Eyes unseen but certain. Still watching, even as the morning sun rose, I walked slowly. Mist thinning around shoulders. The canyon shrinking behind me. Yet in every pause, in every rustle of leaves, I felt it. The gaze unyielding, impossible to shake. I exhaled. Heart still racing. Boots pressing wet earth. And though I left, I knew the canyon held them, eyes that vanish at dawn, but never truly gone.